Today on Food for Thought, we're cooking in bulk. I've got 2 fantastic make-ahead recipes that'll help you put a delicious meal on the table all week. First up, an adaptable vegetable lasagna that's so filling you won't even miss the meat. Then it's onto a freezer-friendly roasted vegetable soup that's packed with flavor. And later, my friend Laurel is dropping by to taste my creations and share what it's like trying to feed 5 hungry brothers. I'm pretty sure one of the things we all have in common is feeling like we don't have enough time to do what we need to do in a day. Between working late or kids or school, there just doesn't seem to be enough time to squeeze in relaxation, much less a healthy meal. This vegetable lasagna is a fantastic way to save time during the week. You make it once and then you have meals all week long. I also love it because I just use stuff I have left over in my fridge, line everything up, and then all I have to do is assemble and bake. I'm going to show you how to do it from beginning to end so you have everything you need to make a wonderful lasagna. To make my lasagna, you need some really basic items that I usually have just lying around my pantry this time of year. A butternut squash, onions, spinach, a little bit of cheese. It's super basic. So to start, I have a butternut squash, and this is what it looks like raw. It's really delicious, but you can easily use pumpkin, even yams, anything with that kind of really sweet, round squash flavor is great. So I've already peeled, de-seeded, and chopped up my butternut squash, so it looks like this. I have them in about 1-inch cubes. I've salted and peppered them. I drizzled them with a little bit of olive oil. I'll just add a little finishing touch. And I'm going to put this in the oven and roast them until they're buttery soft and absolutely delicious. While the squash is roasting, I can get started on the rest of my lasagna ingredients. So I'm sauteing my spinach with a little bit of garlic and chili flake, and you might have to do this in a couple of batches because spinach is super voluminous and then it sautés down to absolutely nothing. This looks just about ready, so I'm gonna set this aside and get started on my onions. So I'm going to saute my onions in the exact same pan. It's a great way to save on cleanup time. So I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil, and then my chopped onions. And you can use sliced onions, basically whatever you have lying around. And the big key thing here is I'm going to cook my onions until they're a beautiful deep brown. That means all of the sugars in them have really developed, and that means lots of flavor. All right, and a little bit of salt and pepper. And that's the other key. If you perfectly season everything as you go along, you don't have to do a lot of adjustment in the end, and it has a much deeper flavor. Great, well, I'm just gonna babysit these for a while and just keep my eye on them until they get that perfect color. Well, these look just about done, so I'm gonna put them aside and get started on my bechamel, which is a French mother sauce, which means it's a very basic sauce that you can add tons of ingredients to turn into any kind of sauce you like. It's a white sauce, so it's really rich and beautiful, and it goes great on top of vegetables or in a mac and cheese. So I like to double my recipe, freeze a little bit, so I can always have mac and cheese or lasagna whenever I want. So first, I'm going to simmer my milk. And I'm using whole milk, because it has a lot of flavor and it's really rich. Next, I'm going to add a bay leaf, some peppercorns, and now I'm just gonna add a little bit of nutmeg for a bit of flavor. And I'm already making this my own sauce by adding these ingredients. So you can have a lot of fun turning a basic bechamel, which is essentially just milk, butter, and flour, into whatever kind of sauce you want. Next, for just a little bit of heat, I'm adding some chili flake, some whole cloves of garlic, and then some sprigs of parsley. And all these flavors are actually going to be pretty subtle in the sauce. They just add a little bit of something that is so delicious in the lasagna. And now I'm going to cook my lasagna noodles in salted boiling water. And the trick here is I want them to be al dente, which means they have a little bit of a bite. Al dente just means of the tooth in Italian, so that's exactly what you want. You want to be able to chew through it. So my milk looks just about simmered. I'm gonna swap these out and get started on the base of my bechamel, a roux. A roux is basically just butter and flour mixed together until it becomes kind of pasty and a little bit nutty. So this gives something for the milk to grab onto when I turn it into a sauce. And I know 2 pots might look a little bit intimidating, but if you want that velvety texture and for the butter to be able to cling to the milk, you need to do them separately so you can have a lot of control when you're stirring them together. So to make my roux, I'm going to melt my butter and then whisk flour into it. One of the basic rules for making a roux is you want to have equal parts butter and flour approximately. My butter is nice and melted, so now I'm going to add my flour bit by bit. I'm just going to mix it with my whisk. The butter is starting to brown just a little bit, and I'm thickening this up with my flour. You can see it's starting to form a little bit of a paste. At first it'll be kind of on the runny side, but I want it quite thick. Well, this looks fantastic. It smells nutty. There's no raw flour anywhere. So I am going to strain my simmered milk into it a little bit at a time, stirring so to make sure everything comes together in one cohesive whole. And you can see immediately, look at that. This is not something you would put on your lasagna, but as you add liquid, it'll totally become thick and velvety. You can see it's perfect. It's so beautiful, really velvety smooth, no lumps at all. So I've turned off my heat, and now I'm gonna add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. It adds a really great flavor and just adds to that whole cheesy, velvety consistency. It smells delicious. And once again, this is something that's really easy to double or triple and stick in the freezer. It's great for adding to lasagna, mac and cheese, anything you like. Well, this looks about ready. Now I'm going to pull the squash out of the oven and put it all together. Well, the hard part's over. Now all I have to do is assemble and bake my lasagna. So to start, I'm gonna put just a tiny bit of bechamel on the bottom so that the lasagna noodles have something to stick to. And so I'm gonna put 3 noodles on the bottom, and now I'm gonna add all of my vegetables. So you can dole this out however you like, but I just kind of eyeball it. So I just sprinkle my butternut squash, and now I'm gonna take about 1/3 of my spinach. Now my onions. The onions just add this really beautiful, kind of deep caramel flavor that pairs great with the butternut squash. Next, I'm going to add my cheese, and I have some really lovely fresh mozzarella that I have cut into small pieces. I just want it evenly distributed because mozzarella melts really well, so a little goes a long way. Next, I have ricotta. Just dip your hand in here, and I just sort of piece it out, filling in any of the blank spots that the mozzarella isn't going over. So next, I'm going to chiffonade my basil, which sounds kind of intense and a little fancy, but all that means is I'm going to slice my basil into ribbons. And the reason why I'm doing this is basil is a really leafy, fresh herb, and those herbs, they bruise really easily. So if you do this quickly and kind of right before you're gonna use them, you're gonna get a lot of flavor and they're not gonna break down at all. So to do it, it's super simple. I put a few leaves right on top of each other, and now I'm gonna roll them into just a little bundle, and using my knife, I'm just slicing it very thinly. You can go very thin on this if you want this as a finishing touch to a dish. It looks really beautiful. Or you can go a little bit rough if it's more just about the flavor. I'm gonna take 1/3 of this and just sprinkle it over the whole thing. Great, well that is evenly coated. Now all I'm gonna do is put a little bit of bechamel sauce on it, just enough to kind of fill in the crevices. So when we get back, I'm going to finish assembling my lasagna and then put it in the oven and get started on my soup. So stay tuned. Today I'm cooking meals that I can enjoy all week. Up next, a delicious roasted vegetable soup. But before I get started on that, it's time to put the finishing touches on my vegetable lasagna. I've added everything, and all I need to do is put my bechamel and my Parmesan on top, and then it's into the oven. So the bechamel, I am just pouring all that I have left, which is quite a bit. It just creates this beautiful bubbly layer that browns up beautifully in the oven and tastes amazing. This is where all of those little flavors that we steeped into the milk really come out. And the finishing touch is some Parmesan cheese. And the great thing about parm is it browns really well, and it adds this kind of crunchy, cheesy, flaky texture on top that is so delicious. Well, this looks beautiful. I'm gonna bake this in the oven, and I can't wait to dig in. So I'm now gonna make my soup, and I love soups for time saving and for sticking in my freezer. I just make a ton of it, and then I have plenty in the freezer for later. The core of my soup is kabocha squash. It's a really lovely bright orange squash, and it has a lot of really great sweet, kind of nutty flavors, similar to a butternut squash or a baking pumpkin. So both of those are perfect substitutes if you can't find kabocha. I love it though because it has a great texture. When you roast it, it practically melts away and is perfect for a pureed soup like this one. To roast kabocha squash, it's super easy. All you have to do is split it in half. You don't even have to peel it. I am just gonna scoop out the seeds and then get it ready for the oven. Great, so my kabocha is totally scooped out. I'm gonna set this aside and get started on my other ingredients. First up is a celery root, and it is actually a root of a celery plant. You can see it right here. And the interesting thing about celery root, rather than using actual celery, is it has sort of a sweet, almost fennel or anise flavor that is really great in soups. Plus, you can roast it, so that means it purees beautifully. So to break this down, I'm gonna slice off the celery stems. These would actually be great in soups too if you wanted to create your own broth. And now I'm going to peel this entire thing, and then I'm gonna slice it in half. And the reason why I'm slicing it into a kind of 2 large chunks is because it takes a little longer to roast. So instead of going back and forth to the oven, I'm slicing it smaller so everything roasts at the same rate. I'll put these on my baking pan along with my kabocha squash and a whole sweet potato. So now I'm moving on to my onions, and these make up the base of everything going into my soup pot. And they don't have to be super perfect the way you chop them because I am blending the entire soup. So my onions are done. And now I'm gonna oil up my vegetables and get them in the oven. Just a little light coating and you're good to go. The great thing about this soup too is it's so rich in color. And whenever you have really brightly colored vegetables, that usually means they're even better for you. So a vegetable like this, like the kabocha squash, which is really bright orange, that means it has lots of beta carotene, similar to a carrot. Well, these look ready for the oven. I'm gonna take them in. So while my vegetables are roasting in the oven, I'm gonna get started on caramelizing my onions. Now the onions make up the base of the soup, so all of the spices I add and then the vegetables after that, they really all sit on that onion flavor. So I'm just gonna add a little tablespoon or 2 of olive oil, and then I'm gonna add my onions. And as these start to wilt a little bit, get a little bit translucent, I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and some pepper. Well, my onions look great. They're a beautiful golden brown and they're just starting to turn translucent. So I'm gonna add my garlic to the mix so this can get toasted really gently. And now I'm going to add all of my spices. And I have quite a mixture of spices happening. So first up are chili flakes. And this is just for that heat factor. Next, I'm adding coriander, which just has a really beautiful kind of fragrant flavor. And after that, I'm adding cumin, which is so earthy and almost gives the soup a meaty flavor. And then I have a little bit of chili powder and my favorite, smoked paprika. Oh my goodness, this is just fabulous in this soup and it's such a beautiful color. It just kind of elevates the entire thing. So I'm just gonna stir this up and let all of the spices get warmed together with the onion. And while that happens, I'm going to pull out my roast vegetables and let them cool a bit. So I've pulled my vegetables out of the oven and they look so good. They're so golden brown and very tender to the touch. First, I'm just gonna chuck my celery root right into the soup pot. Because I'm pureeing the soup, I don't really have to fuss over making sure everything's in uniform small pieces. Next, I'm going to scoop out all the flesh in my kabocha squash. Look at that color, oh my gosh. It's practically like caramel, it's so beautiful. And see how tender it is? I hardly have to give at all in order to scoop this out. I'm just using a regular spoon. It's so tender. Next, I'm going to scoop out my sweet potatoes. I'm just gonna gently slice it in half. And using my spoon, I'm just scooping out the interior and pop those right into the soup. So now I'm gonna add my chicken broth and I'm gonna simmer it for only about 30 minutes, which for soup is not a very long time at all. The reason why I don't have to simmer it very long is because I already roasted the vegetables, so all of those flavors are developed. I'm gonna let this simmer for a little bit, and when we get back, I'm gonna finish my soup, check on my lasagna, and put it all together. putting together time-saving recipes today, cooking in bulk so I don't have to worry about answering the what's for dinner question for a while. So my soup is finished. It's been simmering on the stove for just a little bit, but before I puree it, I'm gonna grab my lasagna because that's done too. Before I can eat or package up my soup, I need to puree it first. I like to use an immersion blender. It's so easy, you just stick it in and it blends the soup for you. But if you don't have one, you can definitely ladle your soup into a blender and that'll do the trick too. So here it is. I just put it down and I just press the blend button and it'll whirl everything together. And I'm gonna try to find chunks just to make sure I break apart every last bit. Well, that looks very smooth, really silky. And if I wanted to be obsessive about it, I could strain this as well and get a really fine, almost restaurant grade texture. But this is just for me for dinner this week, so I'm gonna relax on that. Well, now is definitely the time to give it a taste because all of the flavors are perfectly mingled together. Let's see how it is. That is so good. You can really taste all of that roasted flavor. It's so delicious. And then all of the spices, they add all these different levels and sort of complex tastes and kicks. It is so tasty. I am gonna add a little bit of salt and pepper because I like my soup really savory. Give it a quick stir, and that looks great. My friend Laurel comes from a huge family. She has 5 brothers and they're always hungry. So she's coming over and I'm gonna get some of the stuff packaged up for her to take home. I'm going to let my soup cool to room temperature before I package it and put it in the fridge. The reason why is a room temp soup is going to freeze a lot more solidly when it goes into the freezer. Also, if this had any cream or meat in it, I would want to put this on an ice bath to make sure it cools as quickly as possible. That's going to ensure that there's no bacteria or any bad stuff happening when I put it in the freezer. And it's great to have different size containers. I have these little guys for me to have for lunch, and then I have these big ones for Laurel to take home to her brothers. This is one of my favorite meals. Add a loaf of crusty artisanal bread, and you are so ready for dinner. Well, I'm in great shape with my soup, and now it's time to move on to my lasagna. I'm gonna slice this up and package it for Laurel and her brothers and save a couple slices for us to enjoy later. Another great thing when you're cooking in large quantities like this is you can buy from the bulk bins, so you can get exactly the right amount you want. You don't have to deal with excess packaging or any leftovers. This size is perfect for me for dinner at home. And for dinner with a friend like Laurel today, you can do 2 slices in a larger container and be totally ready to go. So my lasagna is mostly packaged up, but I'm gonna save these 2 slices for my friend Laurel and I to enjoy when we come back. Well, I'm here with my friend Laurel, who comes from a big family with tons of hungry brothers, so she is no stranger to bulk cooking. I have definitely had a Laurel status cooking day.
First of all, I'm honored that you would say that. Tell me about this day.
Well, I have basically been cooking for the entire week in one day. So I made lasagna to freeze, I made a ton of soup, both of which you are taking home to your bros.
Oh, it'll be gone in like 10 seconds.
They're like locusts. It's crazy how much food those guys go through.
I know. It's really ridiculous. But we keep a stocked freezer, refrigerator, planning is key.
I feel like you have to have a strategy when you're cooking that much that often.
Right. Well, you have to always have things in the refrigerator for like a huge salad. That's really important. And just know like what's in there at all times and know that there's always like 8 pounds of pasta on hand in the pantry and you'll be fine.
So it's just using up what you have in the simplest way possible. Well, that's kind of what I try to do with our lasagna. I mean, it's inspired by all the leftovers I always have this time of year. I always have leftover roasted butternut squash from like dinners, like sauteed spinach, caramelized onions, and the rest is just cheese and pasta. So it's super simple, but definitely a fave. Do you want to dig in?
Totally.
You're digging it?
Wow, it's delicious. I love it.
Is this the kind of thing your brothers would be down with even though it's all vegetables?
Oh yeah, they love their vegetables. They know they're good for them. It's very important.
I like the idea that even though you're cooking for a really large number of people, that doesn't mean you can't have really quality food,
Right.
really delicious food. And that's the thing, your food's always beautiful and so delicious. And all your brothers love it. It's not just something to fill them up, it's something that's tasty too. And I think that's why they're always so voracious, because they know it's good.
Well, it's much like this lovely lasagna. It's very
Thank you.
elegant.
Well,
and it's
I try to stay seasonal, and I feel like when you use ingredients that are at their peak of flavor and you use quality, like really good cheese, really good pasta, all of the things kind of come together and you don't have to do very much to it for it to be delicious.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Laurel, for coming over. You are such a bowl cooking inspiration to me. You do it with style.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is an excellent example of bulk cooking right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I had a lot of fun learning all about bulk cooking today. I learned that you could have quality and bulk at the same time, and I could have a well-stocked fridge for the entire week filled with delicious food. See you next week for another episode of Food for Thought.
Closed captioning and other promotional consideration is provided by